Welcome back to my channel. Story 1. Elizabeth Williams was a beautiful girl. She grew up with her dad. Her dad was overprotective. He knew a lot of guys were interested in Elizabeth. Mr. Williams did his best to scare them all away. Boys would try to get Elizabeth's attention. Some would throw rocks at her window. They thought Mr. Williams wouldn't catch them. Mr. William bought 2 guard dogs. He trained them to attack boys who tried this. Some boys would try to walk Elizabeth home. Mr. Williams made sure this didn't happen. He parked right in front of her school every day. He brought his 2 dogs each time. Elizabeth was single for a very long time. Story 2. Donald Campbell needed to go to New York. He lived in Los Angeles. Driving there would take 3 days. His only other option was to take an airplane. That would take around 6 hours. Donald was afraid of airplanes. He had never been on one. "That's a dumb fear," said his friend. "Cars are more dangerous than airplanes." Donald was sure this was a lie. He didn't trust something so big in the air. Donald ignored his friend. He was going to drive for 3 days. Halfway through the trip, Donald got very sleepy. He was on a highway. He crashed into a giant trailer. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like the video, and comment. Story 3. Kimberly and Jason were surfing. They did this every weekend. They were far into the ocean. Suddenly, something touched Jason's foot. Jason froze. "Is something wrong?" asked Kimberly. "Don't move," Jason replied. "I think there's a shark under us." Kimberly panicked. She put goggles on. Then, she looked under the water. When she came back up, she had a big smile on her face. She was laughing very loud. "This isn't funny," said Jason. Suddenly, a baby seal jumped onto Jason's surfboard. Jason screamed and jumped into the water. He hid there for almost a minute. "That's the shark," said Kimberly. Jason was very embarrassed. Story 4. Nancy was 16 years old. She wanted to learn how to drive. Her parents were too busy to teach her. Nancy asked her older sister to help her. She didn't have any time either. Nancy was frustrated. "I'm sure driving isn't even that hard," thought Nancy. One night, she waited for everyone to go to bed. She sneaked downstairs. She grabbed the car keys and went outside. She was going to teach herself to drive. Nancy turned the engine on. She backed the car up slowly. Then, she pressed the gas pedal. She had no idea the car was that fast. She hit a small bump and pressed the brake. When she looked back, she saw a dark shadow. She had run over her dog. Story 5. Jeff was a 40-year-old man. He had no job. He never even went to school. Jeff had lived with his parents his whole life. They were starting to worry about him. All Jeff did every day was to play video games. "You need to do something with your life," said his parents. Jeff ignored them. He was happy with his life. Jeff's parents came up with a plan. They started asking him for rent money. "How am I supposed to pay that?" asked Jeff. "With a job," replied his mom. When Jeff didn't give them rent, they took all his video games and sold them. Jeff was furious. He went out to look for a job. He needed to buy the video games back. Story 6. Christopher bought a new car. He was going to travel the country with it. His friends helped him prepare for the trip. "You should carry a spare tire," said Brian. Christopher didn't see a point to that. "New cars don't need spare tires," he said. 1 week later, Christopher went on his trip. He couldn't wait to explore the country. Suddenly, he heard a loud pop. His car started making a strange noise. Christopher pulled over to the side of the highway. He walked around his car. A back wheel had popped. He had barely driven for 1 hour. Christopher had to call Brian for help. Brian laughed at him for hours. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like the video and comment. Story 7. Thanksgiving is one of the biggest holidays in the U.S. It is followed by another major U.S. holiday. This day is known as Black Friday. On this day, stores hold big sales. Then, Americans across the country go crazy. A lot of people get violent on Black Friday. One year, Carol went shopping on the day. She wanted to buy a new coat. "I hope the mall isn't too crowded," she said. She couldn't believe her eyes. Every store was flooded with people. Carol spotted a nice blue coat in one store. It was on sale for $20. Carol was about to try it on. Suddenly a lady jumped at her and took the coat away. "I'm going home," said Carol. Story 8. Barbara invited her friends over to her house. She was excited to show them her new house. "What do you guys think?" she asked them. Her friends didn't know what to say. They looked around and tried to think of something nice to say. "It's interesting," said Betty. Barbara had a strange taste. Everything in her house was pink. This included the curtains, the sofas, and even the carpet. "What does your husband think about it?" asked Betty. "He loves it," said Barbara. Betty and the other women didn't believe her. "I swear he does," said Barbara. "He picked the color himself." Story 9. Mr. Moore was retired. He used to be an actor. He was very loved and famous. Everywhere he went, women would stop him. They used to want to hug him and take pictures. He was a very handsome man. It was rare to ever see him by himself. Now, Mr. Moore was almost always alone. Many years had passed since his acting days. He had aged a lot. Sometimes, he walked around Hollywood Boulevard. He hoped someone would recognize him. No one ever did. He was no longer handsome. His good looks were now covered with wrinkles. He wished he could be young again. Story 10. Mr. and Mrs. King had a teenage daughter named Michelle. They were always arguing with her. Michelle was a good daughter. However, her parents were very strict. One evening, Michelle wanted to go out. Her parents weren't letting her go. "Your room isn't clean enough," shouted Mrs. King. Michelle decided to sneak out. Her parents did not know where she was going. The next morning, Mrs. King went to Michelle's room. She wanted to apologize for being so hard on her. Michelle was nowhere to be found. Since they did not get to ask where she was going, they did not know where to look. They never saw Michelle again.